The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we look at the deeper themes and hidden layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm Dom Bettinelli of the StarQuest Network, and I wanted to start this show briefly with a note that this is an episode we recorded a few months ago to thank our patrons at patreon.com/StarQuest for their generosity in making this and all the shows at StarQuest possible. We gave them early exclusive access, but now, a few months later, we're making it available to you to show you one of the benefits of becoming a patron of StarQuest. Our patrons asked questions of our Tolkien experts, and they got some great answers. And so now we bring you this show, and we hope you enjoy it.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media that's derived from them. And all this is made possible by you, our patrons on Patreon. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me today on the panel are Jeff Haecker. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And Mike Schramm. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason. Hello there, Pat.
Howdy, Tom.
And here at StarQuest, we are always looking for new and exciting ways to thank you, our patrons, whose generous support makes all of our shows possible. We recently reached out to our patron community to see if you had any questions to ask about Tolkien or his marvelous legendarium, and we got some really fantastic responses. So we will be devoting this entire episode to your patron questions as a special thank you for your continued support of StarQuest and the Secrets of Middle-earth. And be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or any podcast directory or app. Although I actually just heard recently that Google Podcasts is going away, so...
Yeah, it's going to go to
Don't
YouTube
follow us
Music.
on that, then. Don't go to that one.
That's dumb. And because that's the player I use, but whatever. And you can find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia or on Twitter or X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And don't forget...
call Thomas on a landline and he'll just talk you through the whole thing. How's that? Yeah.
Boo. And don't forget that you can get your own official Secrets of Middle-earth merch, including our awesome t-shirt at sqpn.com/merch. It's a great way to support our show and to show your love for Tolkien and his wonderful world of Middle-earth. So we got some great questions, and basically this is going to be kind of a loose, kind of freeform thing. I'll read off these questions and then I'll just pose it to the group, because I'm sure that they're all kind of, I noticed, like lore-based questions, which is great because we'll have a lot to talk about. Our first question comes from Stephanie Ann, who writes, I have always wondered about the wizards in Lord of the Rings. Are wizards born or are they made? What determines the wizard's skill set and rank? Thank you guys for all you do. Okay.
Well, we know that a wizard is always on time. He always arrives exactly when he means
precisely when he means to.
Precisely when he means to.
Yeah, that's what I usually say when I'm late to stuff, which is anything.
I mean, I feel like this has been answered definitively, right? They come on a comet. They come on a comet, according to... Wait, what's going on here? I thought we all saw this.
Excellent right hook. That caught him way off guard.
Yeah. Yes. If you have seen The Rings of Power, you might be under the impression that wizards arrive on Middle-earth on meteors. But that is something that they invented for the television show. I'm not sure why, because for me, it was one of the sillier elements of the show, because there is a definitive answer to this actually in the Legendarium. The Unfinished Tales.
Oh, let's hear your take on it then, Thomas. Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, I want to answer Stephanie Ann's question because the Unfinished Tales is our primary source for this information.
Well, before even that, in the Silmarillion, during the creation myth, Ainulindale, you hear about the Valar and then
Yes.
the Ainur and the Valar. Like I kind of like to think of the Valar as like the archangels, and the Maiar, which is the order of wizards, and Sauron and the Balrogs. They're all considered Maiar. So as a starting point, they're created by the music of the or I guess were they created by the Valar or during the music, or were they created by Eru Ilúvatar?
All the Ainur are kind of created directly by
together.
Eru Ilúvatar. That's the impression I always got.
Yeah,
but they exist before Middle Earth. That's the key here.
Because the thing, especially in that very kind of mythic creation story, they don't really break down the like principal versus intermediate causes anyway. So you don't really always get that impression. But
right, it's sort of like some of them are almost created through the act of the song. But
yeah, a few of them. Yeah,
I mean, the whole theme is being run by Ilúvatar anyway. So
yeah, and yeah, like I was saying, like for those who may not know, the wizards and Sauron and Balrogs and Ungoliant, the spider who's the ancestor of Shelob, they're all Maiar. Because there's the 7 is it 7 named Valar or 8 Valar?
There are 7 named male Valar. Male Valar, okay. I believe. I think there's over a dozen total. I think.
Yeah. Only unfortunately, I don't always remember all of them, but you remember the main ones. But yeah, basically, wizards are of the same class as Sauron and the others.
They're angelic beings, essentially.
Yeah, they're like the angels, whereas the Valar are the archangels.
Yeah, and they kind of get their flavor or their power from which, I mean, if you're thinking of a lot of the Maiar fall under certain Valar and are kind of their court or are in their train, the way they put it. And so the way they are comes more or less from their Valar. And if I remember, like Gandalf and Saruman are both Manwë, if I remember correctly.
Saruman's Aule, actually, the Smiths, just like Sauron. Aule has a really bad track record, as we've said on this show before. He has a really bad track record with apprentices.
But I have such a soft spot for him still. We talked about that in the last episode. So it kind of reminds me of it. Doesn't it kind of strike you very similar to almost like an angelic hierarchy? You know, and that's why I brought up the thing about like in the Annalindale, it doesn't go specifically into each thing as an intermediate cause, but Aquinas kind of approaches this question too in terms of the relationship between the orders of the choirs of angels and things like that, and you kind of get that sense just as you kind of work your way down the hierarchy in creation Middle Earth too.
Yeah, and what's interesting too about the Maiar for me is like eventually they can take the various forms when they come into the world, into Arda. They can take like one of the Maiar is the I forget the name, but the original giant eagle is a Maiar, and he's a servant of Manwë, and so all the eagles are descended from that. In the same way the Shelob is descended from Ungoliant, and as well. One of the other questions was about this, so I'll save it. But there's some Maiar blood in the line of Aragorn, and so.
And what's interesting too is that the once the wizards, the Astari as they're called in Valinor, when they take on mortal bodies, they're subject to a lot of the things mortals are subjected to. They can feel, even though they're these angelic beings, they can feel hunger, they can feel thirst, they can be weary. They don't die of old age, but they can be killed, and they actually don't have access to their full panoply of angelic powers. And even a lot of their memories of Valinor are suppressed when they're in Middle Earth, because the Valar essentially send the wizards to Middle Earth, because the backstory of this is that, of course, Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, is defeated by the Valar in spectacular fashion at the end of the First Age. But with Sauron, for whatever reason, the Valar don't want to interfere directly again. So they send emissaries in the form of the wizards. So these wizards are not like Harry Potter wizards, they are not even like Merlin, really, because they're more than human. Although in some versions of the Arthur mythos, Merlin is half angelic, but yeah, they're definitely more than human. They're not truly human, which is interesting, even though they look human and they've taken on human forms. Gandalf is more like his Maiar self after he comes back from the dead, when he's Gandalf the White, because he's been, he's been given that level up and he has more power, access to his angelic abilities now.
You almost get that sense when he's first approached by Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli in the forest, where he doesn't recognize that name right away.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of that, like, this is never who I really was. This is just who and not to take that whole Gandalf, the importance of that name away from him, but that was still sort of a name that was given to him by, because he was on Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
I mean, same thing with Mithrandir. Like Mithrandir is just is Kenya, Quenya, like language or whatever too.
For the Grey Pilgrim. Yeah.
There's another part of the question. I don't know.
Yeah. Saruman the White kind of betrayed his purpose. And so the Valar basically gave him, they kind of passed that role to Gandalf. So it's almost like a form of apostolic succession in that.
I thought you were going to compare it to what Eliakim and from Isaiah 22, right, where God replaces him with the new, gives him the keys and all that. Gives him the keys, it's a whole
throws off this terrible steward.
See, we all thought the Old Testament was the typology for the Pope, but really it was Saruman and it was the High Council. It was Saruman and Gandalf.
Saruman, your staff is broken.
Yeah, where was Scott Hahn on that one? It's like.
And like we joked about, they in the Rings of Power we see a Maiar, or presumably a Maiar, arrive in a comet. Now we still remains to be seen, is he a blue wizard, which we'll talk more about, and
we'll get to that later. Yeah,
but correct me if I'm wrong, but all the Astari, all the wizards arrive on Middle Earth on a ship, don't they? They do what.
Yeah, Tolkien, there's two versions of it. In one version, they all arrive together. And in the other version, the two blues arrive separately in the Second Age.
Yeah, way
with Glorfindel. Yeah. And then the three, Saruman, Gandalf, and Radagast arrive in the Third Age. So there's a bit of, the canon was never really settled in terms of the wizards' arrival.
To me, I think the most interesting thing about the wizards is that they all show up as humans. Because they could have been, right, because they're, theoretically angelic beings, so they could have taken any shape or any form. And like as far as we know, the blue wizards, we don't know that much about them, but as far as we know, they all show up as men. They don't come as elves or dwarves or orcs or not that they would come as orcs, but
hobbits.
As hobbits or ents.
Is that how you'd think Saruman would know how the orcs were made then? If that was the case, he wouldn't have to bring it up rhetorically in the movie. So,
well, doesn't Gandalf when he first arrives to Middle Earth, or maybe it's when he arrives in Valinor, he's in more of an elvish form, and he kind of changes as the elves kind of learn who he is. Or am I?
Oh no, you're right. I think there's a reference somewhere. It's either in the Silmarillion or the Unfinished Tales that when he was in Valinor as Olorin,
maybe
Gandalf
that's what it
liked
is.
To appear in elf form. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like once when they're in the Undying Lands, they have a little bit more kind of freedom in their form, because as we said, they can shapeshift. Sauron was a shapeshifter as well. If you read the Silmarillion, there's does some interesting things there, but it seems like once they arrive in Middle Earth, they're kind of locked in that human form.
At least the Astari, anyway.
Yeah,
it's almost like they, the Valar wanted to handicap them in a way. I think so that they wouldn't go bad like Sauron, although that didn't entirely work because of Sauron. But I feel like they wanted to say okay, you can't set yourselves up as Dark Lords in your own right, so. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to sort of, dampen your power a little bit. Because I think what they were really supposed to do was rally the free people of Middle Earth to defend themselves. not so much take that frontline leadership position as be sort of the catalyst,
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what we get from, Gandalf's the most obvious example, and he is very much pegged by Tolkien as this is how they should have done it, right? Like if Saruman had done his job right, he would still be Saruman the White, and this is what he would be doing. And that's all Gandalf does, is constantly ride around the map convincing everybody there's a problem.
Yeah.
And
in terms of rank, because I know part of the question was about rank, I believe it's just the Valar appointed Saruman as the chief. So like in terms, it really depends on that authority has to come from the Valar.
I was kind of wondering about that too. I mean, this is totally just kind of like my own speculation or reflection, where you want to get the sense of it's not just a purely arbitrary thing. Like they just drew names out of a hat, and it just happened to be Saruman. And then, he had the power, so it corrupted him. But if you think of like what each one of them, at least the three that we know of, again, it kind of reminds me of like, there's three archangels whose name we know of, but we don't know, the rest of them. But they're sort of devoted to different things. And we obviously see that, in their depictions. And I know we only see Radagast in the Hobbit movies, that we won't speak of, but
not yet.
But
not yet, yeah.
But obviously we get some of that in his very brief mentions in the Silmarillion. But it's like Saruman, he's always known he's the one who can like manipulate language. They always say like, don't, keep your ears closed to what he's saying, or he's going to like confuse your mind, or he's going to kind of turn you guys around. And we see him do that with some of the peoples of Middle Earth, in getting, and obviously with his servant Wormtongue as well. But then later on with the hobbits, right before the Scouring of the Shire. And so his is like the highest in terms of what he deals with, because he's dealing with language and lore and ideas, which I think he's even described as that's like his specialty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we have Gandalf, which is like, he's dealing primarily with the rational creatures. Like he's the one who is always this kind of bridge between the elves, the men, the dwarves, and the hobbits. And that's why, like you guys said, he's always going around from place to place, trying to help the relationships or unite the peoples together and things like that. So his is like the rational creatures. And then we have Radagast, who is, he's the one who's kind of known as he's always in the forest, like with the animals. So he's sort of like dealing with the sub-rational creatures, right? With the what is it, the hedgehog that he is, or the bird, or the birds and rabbits and stuff. And so that was, like I said, those are just the three that we know of. Were the blue Istari, were they like on even lower orders, like something more elemental? Like you had them dealing with like, that's like I said, that's all speculation or whatever. But that's what we sort of get. And that would make sense that at first Saruman would have been at the top, or the chief of the order, until, his choices is what knocked him off, is what corrupted him and what threw him down.
And I think Gandalf too was just generally more humble. Like I believe he was afraid even to go to Middle Earth. Like he didn't really want to go. He was, but he submitted his will to, to the Valar and to Eru Ilúvatar. So it's almost like, I think there's that, there's some lesson there of being humble, is kind of being that humble leader is what kind of kept him from that corruption. But even was, and this could be more from the movies, but even in the Fellowship films, or the Lord of the Rings films, he was afraid to take the ring. Like he didn't want to touch the One Ring when Bilbo was, or when Frodo inherited it, because he didn't want, like Frodo was trying to give it to him, and he said, "Don't tempt me," because like he knew, even as good and humble as he was, like something like that could corrupt him. So.
Yeah, I don't know, I can't remember where this idea came from, maybe the Lost Tales book, but I have this in my head, this conversation between Gandalf and Saruman, like on the boat, or like right before they're about to leave, about who's going to be in charge, because it's like, well, you're a servant of Manwë, and he's the head of the order, and Gandalf's like, yeah, but I don't really want to be in charge, and you're the wisest. So it's kind of Gandalf being like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to be in charge.
It's almost by sacrificing that leadership position gives Gandalf more freedom to go about Middle Earth, and whereas Sauron is Saruman, what's the difference later? But anyway, like Saruman,
Heavy was the head that wore the crown, though, or Heavy was the hand that held the white staff, I guess, would be the.
Yeah, you don't know what Gandalf would have become if he was in that leadership position instead of Saruman. It's an interesting question. But did you guys have any other thoughts on the wizards before we move on to our next question? Okay, so Dan asks, and this is actually an interesting question in terms of Tolkien reading and getting into the Silmarillion. Dan asks, I'm reading the Silmarillion for the first time and getting a bit confused on names and places. Who is Melian again? Which group of elves is he talking about now? Where are we in the timeline, etc.? Is there some kind of cheat sheet or reference doc you'd recommend having with you while reading the Silmarillion? Thanks for all you do. Well, thanks, Dan. Firstly, I just want to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Nerd of the Rings, because he actually has a couple of great videos that can kind of act as cheat sheets for some of the Silmarillion stuff. He has a guide to Tolkien's elves, and also another video on the houses of the Edain, which are the early men. And those two videos will help you kind of keep track of some of the names of the different clans of elves and men. As for individual people's names, I'm not aware of a master sheet or anything. And I admit it is very confusing. The first time I read this Silmarillion, I was a bit lost.
Yeah, there's wikis online that are good. I mean, they're not necessarily spoiler free. So if you're like not really wanting to know kind of how it all ends, maybe avoid that. But yeah, I mean, online, there's various ones online. And we should shout out here in terms of the Silmarillion, Caitlin Fashisa, one of our panelists. She runs Tea with Tolkien, which I believe she's done like book clubs of the Silmarillion with like discussion guides. So definitely check her out. Check out her website and such for resources. I've not really perused it myself, but yeah, I mean, it can be hard to follow sometimes, but yeah, we were kind of alluding earlier. Melian is actually I don't know if we want to answer those couple questions, but she's actually a Maiar. So she's of the same order as the wizards, who, as part of, what's kind of a grand plan among, Eru's grand plan to ennoble men, to make men the noble masters of Arda, to bring that Maiar blood, because she marries King Thingol, the elf, and their daughter is Luthien, who marries Beren and is an ancestor of Aragorn, and they're both ancestors of Beren and Luthien are ancestors of Aragorn and Arwen. So it kind of reunites that bloodline, millennia later.
Just to cut in really quick. So you mentioned Tea with Tolkien. So she has a specific Silmarillion reader's guide. It's a free 64-page ebook that, Thomas, maybe you want to put on the show notes.
I will. Great.
Afterwards. So definitely a resource worth looking into.
Yeah, and I mean, the Silmarillions, it's hard. I know I read it, I think I've read it twice now. The first time I definitely didn't get it as much. And as I've kind of just the lore kind of sucks me in every time. So I read it again last year before, and like I was able to, and I'm a fast reader, and I like to skim through and get to the, see what's happening with the plot. But the Silmarillion is not really that kind of a book. It's a collection of legends and stories. So definitely take your time with it. And we haven't done a
don't
chapter about
the small stuff with it for sure.
Yeah. Because you're not going to get it all the first time, but it's one that like you go back to it and you get more out of it each time. And, we're not going to go and reread. We're not going to do a chapter by chapter podcast about it. I mean, we could.
Why not?
We'd be here a long time.
I will admit that one chapter, which goes into like excruciating detail about the geography of Beleriand,
the lay of Beleriand.
You can probably skip that. If you get bogged down,
there are some cool maps online. I think one is a LOTR project where you can like pull up giant interactive maps of Middle Earth and of of Beleriand, which was the continent that no longer exists. So there's definitely online resources are great, and it's like there's so much there that you can dig into, and like every time we are talking about a topic, I start looking up stuff, and then I find this name that I don't remember, and I look that up, and it leads me to and you just go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So
for me, the first time I read it straight through. Didn't remember a dang thing. I would think I would remember things, and my friends would be like, "That didn't happen that way," and I'm like, "Yeah, it did. I totally did." I read it again, and I have the Atlas of Middle Earth, and I used that.
That's a fantastic book.
Quite extensively. Like I would read that, and then I would pull the Atlas out and read the section and look back and forth, because I do need a map in front of me in order to get things right. And then I would say what made it all work for me was reading the First Age tales, which some of them were only put out by Christopher Tolkien fairly recently. Like Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin, and The Children of Hurin. And once I read those and got it kind of in story form, it made the history piece work. I understood the names and who the people were and how it worked. And so by the third time I read it, it really worked. But it did take me 3 times because, yeah, I totally get that. I'm like, who are we talking about? How many sons of Finwë were there, and why do these people matter?
Well, it's almost like reading the Bible. At one point I've tried to people say I'm going to read the Bible starting with Genesis and go front to back, and while you can do that, you're going to get lost in, probably in Judges and, you're going to get lost in Deuteronomy.
Leviticus is numbers.
Jump on this now. You got a couple of months before January 1st, Tolkien in a year. And you can just be interviewed by today, just like Father Mike Schmitz.
Yeah.
I somehow think it would take us a lot longer than a year to do that.
Especially when we did all the history of Middle Earth.
You'd have to go to a weekly release. Yeah, you'd have to.
I'm a slow reader. I would die. I would just die. What happened to Dad? Oh, he didn't eat for a week because he was reading Tolkien.
I fell out of space and time.
That's how you would have wanted to go. So yeah, that's how you'd want to go, I think.
And as an aside, they are re-releasing the history of Middle Earth now. Do you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
In hardback. And I was like, ooh, I'm like, my bank account's not going to like that, but but yeah, no, there's a lot. And I definitely say if you enjoyed the Silmarillion, find those, the great tales of Beleriand. I have all 3 of them on my bookshelf next to me. And yeah, I like that they expand and even include stuff that was cut.
Yeah.
From the final Silmarillion, like in Beren and Luthien, Tevildo, Prince of Cats.
Prince of Cats.
Why did he cut that?
Yes. I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is so weird, but so awesome.
Yeah. I'm like, even if he had just made it another form of Sauron, that would have been cool. He has many names, many forms and stuff. So I'm like, that was such a cool concept, and he cut it. But yeah, and I'm a bit sad that the Fall of Gondolin is unfinished. Because then that's epic.
Right, it's crazy to me because it's the first thing he wrote, right? He wrote that while he was convalescing after the Battle of the Somme, after he was injured, and that's the first Middle Earth thing he wrote, and he finished one version of it, but he didn't finish the final version. You get Turambar gets right up to the gates, and then that's it. And you're like, come on.
Yeah, there is an account of the battle, but it's kind of like an overview of everything that's happening. There are some cool moments though. So and some of it, actually a lot of the final battle didn't make it into the published Silmarillion. So yeah, if you're looking for more of that stuff, definitely pick up those books.
Coming soon, Amazon's The Fall of Gondolin.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kidding. Well, that would be like a limited series on it.
See a series or an. That's another thing they should consider anime for, because the fall of Gondolin is so over the top and like insanely sort of like violent in an over the top way.
Well, yeah, because like in the original version, there's like a dozen or more Balrogs who show up to the fight, and then later on, Tolkien's like, oh, there's only like 3 or 4 of those guys, and you're like, wait a minute.
No, I'm like, yeah, like don't say there's like 3 or 4 of them. Like,
and an elf is dueling one with the
people say that Game of Thrones went over the top in the final season, but it sounds like Tolkien was doing it first. Like
was doing it first,
yeah. So
well, in the fight, like one of the big battles of the First Age, isn't there like there's dragons in the size of a mountain, and there's flying ships like. Arundel's ship like flying around fighting the dragons that are the size of mountains.
He ends up like being pretty critical in dropping Morgoth, if I remember correctly. Like I'm trying to remember that scene.
That and Calagon the Black.
Yeah.
He slays Calagon the Black. And when Calagon the Black falls on the mountain, Thangorodrim, he destroys it.
Yeah.
So that's how big he is. And I'm like, okay, like it's very Norse. It's very, Twilight of the Gods kind of over the top and epic, which I'm sure is what he's going for. But I guess moving on to our next question, Paul asks, and this is one of my favorite questions about Middle-earth. What do you really think happened to the blue wizards? So I'm going to let you guys go first before I give my own theory.
I mean, I have one. I think I've talked about on Rings of Power before, when we were covering that last year for Thomas and I. So I had the theory that the blue wizards were searching for the original kind of cradle of life of the elves, like Cuvanan is the name of it.
Oh yeah,
which was supposedly lost, but it was somewhere lost in the east, and we see the wizards kind of, what we know of them is they've kind of vanished off into the east. So I kind of have that theory of maybe they're out kind of searching for that original source of that, some kind of primordial power, whatever form it is. They're drawn to it, or they want to, for whatever reason. I don't really have a good theory on what they want, but I kind of had that thought, like maybe that's because, they're going east. The Cuvanan was where the elves were first awakened. Was out east. So,
and men too.
Yeah. So maybe that's what they're looking for, is that kind of that cradle of life, a cradle of sentient life, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, is it supposed to kind of represent the sort of like, I guess, the kind of East of Eden idea is sort of being presented here, where is it representative of like moving away from the center, moving away from the source? And so do you get this, in the same way that biblical characters, when they move away from Eden, that it's supposed to represent something in terms of relationship too? But yeah, I punted on this one because your guess is as good as mine in terms of any sort of theory. So in my mind, I combine kind of the two accounts we get from between, is it the Unfinished Tales and then some of the letters. You have the two, and by the way, their names are like awesome. Like it's what, the Hammer of the East and the Shadow Slayer or something like something.
Oh yeah, they're Middle Earth names.
Yeah.
Their names in Valinor, I think, are Alatar and Palando.
Yes,
but they get more awesome names when they come to Middle Earth.
But they come in the Second Age, and I see them very much as sort of the what we get with Saruman and Gandalf in the Third Age. They're sent to sort of head off Sauron, and in that time frame, a lot of what he does is in the East, right? He's sort of in the East with the Eastern men and setting up the death worship and the Morgoth worship and all of that. And I think their primary aim in that time frame was to disrupt and to sort of try and bring men back, the Eastern men into, a relationship with Eru, a knowledge of the Valinor, to sort of break Sauron's power. And I think there's a potential that they could have been like two of the heroes of the Second Age, unsung heroes, right? Because there's a possibility that Sauron's forces would have been so much more powerful, in the final days of the Second Age, where you have the final alliance of the free peoples of Middle Earth fighting all the peoples in the West fighting against him. And he's, basically retreating back and shrinking in power as he's going back to Mordor. And, then we get the tale that all five of them go over in the Third Age, right? And again, these guys go off to the east and you never hear about them again, right? And you kind of get a feeling like they screwed the pooch on this one. Like they didn't do as well, because unlike in the Second Age, where Morgoth is twice beaten back, first by the Númenóreans and then later on by the combined forces of men and elves, in the Third Age, his power sort of springs forth from Mordor, and he gets constantly reinforced by both, the South and the East from peoples in the East. And you get this concept that maybe the Blue Wizards were not as effective. Maybe they failed. And then there's a couple letters Tolkien writes where he mentions them, and he doesn't talk about them in good light. He says that maybe they felt evil, maybe there's some problem. So there's a thought that maybe they went kind of the same path as Saruman went, and they sort of maybe not become disciples of Sauron themselves, but try and set themselves up as powers unto themselves and are sort of acting as vassals of Sauron. And so there's that kind of interplay. So it doesn't sound like it ends well for them.
Right. Yeah. I tend to agree with your take, Pat. I think too, there's been some new material that's come out recently, I think, where like even like some notes that he wrote after those letters, like he left it open that the Blue Wizards were redeemed in the end. And that like their mission was like that if they did fall, they ended up like, unlike Saruman, they didn't commit to it to the bitter end. I like the idea of them in the Second Age opening up this kind of second front against Sauron, this kind of behind, almost like a guerrilla war almost in the East, rallying those Easterlings, because we know that like not all the Easterlings and Haradrim are going to be on board with this evil, like demonic god king who demands human sacrifice and all that stuff. So
surely not everybody can be the Aztecs, right? Surely.
Right. And like it can't just be one monolithic culture in the East and in the South either. There's got to be different tribes and different nations of men. So I'm sure not all of them are on board. And I believe in some of the most recent material, Tolkien says that even in the Third Age, the effect of what the Blue Wizards did in the Second Age is still there. That if they hadn't done what they did against Sauron in the Second Age, that even in the Third Age, he would have just easily overwhelmed the West. He would have been even more powerful than he was, which was insanely powerful.
Right. 10 to 1.
He would have had, he would have had even more armies at his disposal. So, yeah, I think the canon is not set with the Blue Wizards, which is a bit unsettling because that means in adaptations they can kind of do whatever they want. But
yeah. But do y'all think in Rings of Power, do you think that I'm forgetting the name, is it the Stranger that they call him?
The Stranger, yeah.
Do you think he's a Blue Wizard, or do you think he's Gandalf? Because those are kind of the two theories. I'm hoping Blue Wizard, because I don't really, I don't because the thing about it is like that storyline, the whole series is kind of in an undiscovered, part of the lore that there's not really much there. So they're not not overriding some things, but they're also not like, they're not breaking all of canon. But if it was Gandalf, it might be breaking canon a little bit too hard.
He's going east. with Nori. So I feel like that's more. They almost might be combining Gandalf and the Blue Wizards.
Well, they're still trying to be really ambiguous because they have been the whole season.
Yeah.
So like they're going east, but he's also been hanging out with these things that you are pretty sure are going to become hobbits eventually.
Become the hobbits.
And he says that follow your nose line at the end of season 1 too. So it's really on the nose in terms of what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Well, but it could it be that they're going because I was a Halbrand as Sauron denier the whole,
So was I. Yeah, we all were. And everyone on the podcast was.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if I
should have been on earlier because I was like, that's him right there. Like immediately. I'm like, he saves Galadriel. Huh? That's gotta be him.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it was more of like when we see Halbrand alone, he wasn't really acting like a, he was on, by himself. He wasn't acting
character,
like So that was kind of one of my main, but I mean, but going back to, is it Gandalf or the Blue Wizard? Like, I don't know, like, are they going to do it? I feel like if they do it twice and then to say, oh, it's Gandalf, then like the next time we see a mysterious character that's like, could be somebody, it's like, yep, that's them. They're like, there's not much mystery left. So, well, I'm almost wondering if they're going to go the opposite of the Halbrand as Sauron and say it's, it's not Gandalf, but.
I mean, it seems like, because, the Blue Wizards are always kind of lumped together too. And so then you've got this one that's individual. So that's what makes me, that along with the other stuff seems like it's pointing more towards a, like, winks at the camera, it's Gandalf sort of thing. But
I mean, I'm not going
to die on that hill either. Cause I've been,
I think either way you go, you're breaking with canon. I think that if he's Gandalf, you're breaking a lot harder because he's, showing up a couple thousand, possibly 1,000 years too early. Whereas the Blue Wizards are there. They're there for a long time, potentially. But yeah, they do go, like, it's in my mind, it's almost the same conversation Gandalf and Saruman have, where they sort of one cajoles the other into coming. Come on, you're coming with me, And so I figured they would have gone over together. But I personally, I like the idea that he's a Blue Wizard way more than I like than the concept that is Gandalf. That doesn't sit well with me.
Maybe what they'll reveal is that all the Istari say follow your nose, and when Saruman didn't keep saying that, that's when they knew that something was off. They're like, oh, I don't know, but I don't have a feeling about this guy. That'll be like the foreshadowing.
So in terms of people disappearing, not just the Blue Wizards have fallen off the map in Middle Earth, but other characters too. And Kerry asks in our next question, where do y'all think the Entwives went? It has always bothered me. And could the Entwives represent anything? Mike, I know you had some interesting thoughts on this.
I mean, just a quick Google search will kind of say what the main theory is, that Sauron killed him. Is kind of in the war or leading up to the War of the Last Alliance or something like that. It's like, so that's basically like your quick answer, but that doesn't entirely answer it anyway, because it's like, why were they isolated, or left to in such a situation where that could happen? And plus it seems like something pretty obvious that unless Treebeard didn't know that, he didn't know that was their fate, I guess. But that, again, why were they in a position where they wouldn't know, So that's where it maybe leads to more questions, even if you accept the Sauron, scorched earth, burned them all, or the Brownlands, I think is the
it's the Brownlands.
So even if you accept that, which I'm not really in a position to argue hard one way or the other, but then it still leads to that kind of deeper question of why was there this almost isolation? And I don't know. They're called Entwives and Entmaidens. So it's you already have this battle of the sexes between the two, right? You have this men are from Mars, women are from Venus sort of thing that's set up right away. And so in terms of what they represent, you could get into the whole Jungian psychology or just all the different mythologies that go into the, male sex versus female sex and all the things that represents too. That was just kind of my first thought on it. But
yeah, I don't have a great theory on this. I kind of wonder if maybe so they somehow make it back to, make it over the sea to Amon, to or Valinor, and they're over there and somehow. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't thought much about it. It's one of those things where it's like, it's really hard to speculate on, because it could be like literally anything. There's not really any evidence to kind of go, or, any kernels of anything to go on. So, it could be the Blue Wizards are searching for the Entwives for some reason, or they could be, at Cuvanen in the original Cradle of Life or something.
Oh, they may have gone there. That would be interesting.
That kind of, the Cradle of Life thing kind of fits with, like, we're talking about trees, we're talking about plants, and there is this whole kind of like male and female aspect when it comes to plants, whether it's like the fertilization and the cultivation. And so is that what Tolkien is kind of, giving us a little bit of a picture on? And like I was saying before, you have these feminine figures in mythology, these masculine figures, and they always kind of represent something almost like, representative of masculinity and femininity. And so if, one of the things that you see with, wifeness is the idea of cultivation, right? Ordering the home or the hearth, or the, just that sort of atmosphere. And that has to be, I guess, a balance between the two, right? If it goes over one way or the other, then it's going to like push the other one out. And that's sort of what, don't we kind of get that sense when we talk about the forest? And like, is it Fanghorn where the Ents are?
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's become this like wild, overgrown, like unkept sort of thing. Right. And it's become, in a sense, like life as it's supposed to be can't really live there like it used to be. Like, it's a treacherous kind of, like I said, very unsafe place. We get that glimpse obviously when the hobbits are kind of escaping, and there's this almost like this anger in the woods. And so, was that something that was created, over these eons of time in Middle Earth because of there was an imbalance, right?
Yeah, and Merry even mentions when they first enter the forest that he can't imagine animals even living there.
Yeah.
So it's become kind of hostile, not just to like men and elves, but to like anything that's not plants. It's become this sort of hostility.
And the fact that like Treebeard's first thought is that they're just little orcs, like they're just a little enemy. It's like you're like the first thing, the first living thing. Oh, it must be an enemy, and it's like, it's almost like this. It's like the protective nature of masculinity, but it's gone overboard. It's, for lack of a better term, it's become toxic, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's just out to fight for the sake of fighting. And, because again, if you watch the Two Towers before ever reading any of the books or anything, you definitely get that sense of, it's almost off-putting. Treebeard is,
Treebeard smash,
I always like the idea that the Entwives, like, they went off, they scattered after Sauron burned their garden, and they went dormant somewhere, and they're kind of just, living in or around gardens across Middle Earth. Just as sort of I don't know. I guess that's young me, reading the little bit in The Hobbit where they talk about the walking tree person in the North Moors, and thinking,
that's in Fellowship. Everywhere. That's in like the first chapter.
Oh, that's right.
I was going to bring that up.
Yep.
I was going to bring that up because that's interesting that like there's that little unsolved mystery of Sam talking about, his cousin sighting a tree person in the Shire, and that's never resolved ever. And it's what I like when Tolkien does that, where he leaves these little unsolved mysteries, but at the same time, it makes me wonder, like, could that have been an Entwife? Because Treebeard says they would have liked the Shire because it's like a cultivated land, pastoral, agricultural.
And that was kind of one of their roles, was teaching agriculture to man. And you kind of get that feel that maybe that's where they ended up, was in the great agricultural places. As far as what they represent, for me, the what they represent for me is the loss. For Treebeard and the Ents, and the sort of sorrow, this kind of never-ending sorrow that they live in at the loss of their beloveds, who, you know, it's not, and it's kind of a weird relationship they have, you know, where they would go out of the forest and the Ents would like visit the Entwives on occasion and then come back to the forest, and it wasn't sort of a constant sort of a relationship. And it very much, for me, it very much feels like he sort of wrote in C.S. Lewis's loss of his wife into The Lord of the Rings as that sort of relationship between the Ents and the Ent's wife, and the loss and the feeling you get coming out of Treebeard. I don't know how often Treebeard gets compared to Lewis. I think it happens occasionally. I don't know if it's a direct analog, but
that's interesting, because I read somewhere that before Lewis died, the last discussion he had with Tolkien was about trees. So if Treebeard is supposed to be kind of at least a partial analog for Lewis, that would make a lot of sense. Our last question is actually one that I'm probably going to have trouble answering. All of us maybe, but Lauren. Oh, okay, good. Lauren asks, if there was one story element of The Lord of the Rings you would change, what would it be? Okay, Mike, go.
Fly, you fools. That's the eagles fly Frodo to Mount Doom, and he just drops it right. How is that? That's the most obvious, like,
we don't need 3 books for this. I need 4 lines.
Have you ever heard, like, and I think it's genuine, that there's a bit of audio of Tolkien answering that objection.
I think I have heard, yeah,
and it's really funny. I forget exactly what he says, but I remember it cracked me up.
It's proto drone warfare is what it is. They could have saved so much, so much, like they could have just had the eagle just fly it right in. Now, it would have been tough. Frodo still would have had to be the one to drop it, because you can't have the ring go around the talon of the eagle, or it'd be wearing it. So that'd be problematic. But then Frodo would only have to carry it for a short while. It wouldn't feel as heavy, all that stuff.
Well, even better, there's the theory that, like, why didn't they just tie the ring onto like a rat or a chicken or something and just carry the rat or chicken? Because then you're not. Then Frodo's not carrying no one's burdened with the ring. You're just carrying.
I don't want to see what a rat that's been pressured by the ring looks like. That's like sounds worse than Gollum. Yeah,
you're seeing like this chicken with fangs and like red eyes,
and it'd be even more unpredictable. That's like.
It would just run away and take the ring to Sauron, basically.
Well, I mean, you'd have to, I'm joking. That's
the spies are everywhere. The spies are everywhere. Yeah. That's
right. Yeah, even among beasts and birds. So I mean, okay, I know it was kind of a joke answer, but it does speak to, and we did have we had our episode on the One Ring a little bit ago, and one of the things that was essential of it is that the will had to be involved. So obviously that's where, I mean, and again, I know it was all just teasing or whatever, but that does speak to the reality that, the will, it had to be somebody choosing it, right? Somebody with the will of not just taking it, but taking it with the motivation to destroy too, which the Eagles would have had, by the way. So,
well, and the thing about that, because that theory's gone around forever. But I mean, isn't it that the Eagles are like, they're kind of fickle beings. They're not necessarily like the eagle helped Gandalf because Gandalf saved him from the king from a poisoned arrow at one point. They're not necessarily like they're going to do, they're going to do whatever but what you request them to do. But they're also, the Eagles are kind of a, like if you're airdropping the ring, or carrying the person carrying the ring, like that's going to be pretty obvious eventually. Whereas, you kind of need that secrecy of the quest. Like that's why they didn't go with the giant army to march on Mordor, and that's why,
or bring Glorfindel.
Or Frodo and Sam. They, like the last battle before the gates of Mordor. They, like Aragorn. The whole plan was to distract Mordor and to have everybody looking at them so that they could give Frodo and Sam whatever chance they could. So. I mean, it is a fun theory to think about of flying the ring, but like you said, there are spies among the animals, so like a giant eagle flying around is probably going to be pretty obvious to
that's the
to all
Eagles
the animals.
Eagles Ex Machina, I think is what that one
exactly.
is.
No, and they literally are, because they're made by and they sort of work for Manway.
Yeah,
It's
they're the descendants of the Maiar. That was the original eagle. I forget the name of that. Is it Thorondor? Yeah.
Thorondor, yeah. Or deer.
Gwahir is the top eagle by the Lord of the Rings time frame.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought Manway wanted the ring destroyed too, so that seems to all fit. But
well, Manway gave a puff of air that pushed Gollum over.
Okay.
I mean, he also sent Gandalf.
It's good to know. Good to know that he's a part of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah. To kind of go back to the question though, like
Manway just signed his name on the back after the project was done. That sounds like a group project.
Is this thing still going on?
Well, yeah. At least for me to go back to the question, and I'm assuming she's talking more about the books than the films, because stay tuned for discussion on the films. But I mean, one thing for me that the films I think might have I think I may not say it's an improvement. One of the things changes I like is, and I'm talking about the Lord of the Rings films, is Arwen's role. Like, she has an expanded role compared to the books, because in the books she's just kind of like the figure from afar that Aragorn is in love with, and is he's doing all this so that he can marry her. And he's not the reluctant hero like he is in the book. But I liked Arwen's kind of expanded warrior princess kind of role in the film. So maybe just something along those lines of giving her like more to do and more for the audience or the reader to kind of tie into that as that relationship, because a lot of things in like modern storytelling is like built on a relationship, like the shipping is involved. So, and this one had already been, we knew what was going to happen when the movies were made, because the books had come out 50 years or whatever time beforehand. But I think just have it like, so, not to critique Tolkien's, writing, because who am I to do so? But I mean, if I was adding anything, it might be something like, maybe not, replacing Glorfindel's role, because she kind of does that in the film. She kind of takes over what Glorfindel does in Fellowship. But just maybe like some, expansion on her and, Aragorn's relationship, is like how they, interact in kind of a on the run situation like they do in the Fellowship.
I saw a neat fan scenario where she goes with the Grey Company, where she goes with her brother.
I mean, yeah, that's very possible. Yeah,
and like, she doesn't, in the fan scenario, she doesn't do a lot of fighting or anything. She has more of a healer role, like what Aragorn is doing at Minas Tirith, where she helps him in that way. But it's like, I feel like if the Lord of the Rings were written now, there would be more of an expanded role for her, because, it is kind of like, nowadays you have to give readers, I think, more of a reason, like, okay, why do we care about this relationship?
Well, like Beren and Luthien's relationship, like they go on this like awesome quest together to steal a Silmaril from the Crown of Morgoth and go through all kinds of like crazy adventures, and just maybe something like that to kind of tie in, just to kind of expand her role in a bit would be cool. And I mean, you could headcanon that that kind of stuff happened, and but that for me, that might be the in talking about the books, that's probably the thing that's coming to mind the most.
What about you, Pat? Would you change anything?
I don't think I would change anything. There's lots and lots of stuff I want to know more about. Like the Pookelmen. Like every time I read that passage, I'm like, oh man, I need to find out more about these guys and where they came from and who they are.
They're like Neanderthal men in Middle Earth, which is really cool. I love those guys.
Yeah. There's always stuff I read that I'm like, I want more. But I don't know about if I would change anything. I think if I did, there would be a little more interaction with the original dwarves from The Hobbit, because really you only get one and he shows up at the council, and that's pretty much it. Like
more callbacks, yeah. Right. That could be a fun callback to kind of
have a couple more of them there, or maybe run into them on the thing. I know, and they, they're going to try and meet one. I can't remember. One of them goes to Moria, or maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say you do meet Balin, sort of.
He's dead.
Yeah,
find his bones
and
the relics. I think they're the relics of Balin, is what we.
Yeah,
and Owen wrote the book where it's like they are coming and all that stuff. Poor Owen.
Yeah. So, heck, maybe even finding the dwarves in Moria still there, like still in distress and having
like a dwarf, like an underground like resistance of the dwarves against
like the dwarf catacombs, like the there. I mean, that would kind of make sense that they would have that, but if they were in hiding, then you'd have like a dwarf catacomb. So.
Yeah. So instead of finding just their bones, there are actually still some of them there, and they're, you could still have pretty much the same what happens to the Fellowship happen, but they're put basically on the back steps by these dwarfs, and then the Balrog shows up and everybody scatters.
I mean, even speaking to that, it'd almost be cool if there was like a almost like a dwarf like prophecy of some kind about almost like I don't know, like a. Even if it was some sort of prophecy of like reunite, because we talked about in our dwarves and elves episode where they have this sort of like kinship that goes back to their origins, but it's always been they're like the like the younger brother with the chip on their shoulder. And if there was always this thing that what's going to unite them, and it wouldn't even have to be something corny like it was, Gimli and Legolas's friendship was the real like unity that we made along the way or whatever, but like. Even if they had a little bit more of that, just like we have the basically prophecy of the ring or of the rise of men in this new age of men, could there have been something even like, going all the way back to Aule, there was this prophecy or whatever. I don't know. It'd be kind of a cool thing to explore. But
yeah, and I mean along with that, more like just to expand on that, like more dwarf content would have been really cool. And and in the books you do hear about their, the dwarves of Erebor were fighting, the agents of Sauron out there. So like you hear about the more of the kind of dwarf army type stuff. So
elves and men get a love story. Maybe dwarves and elves get a love story. Is
I was about to say,
I know you're not going to invite me back on anymore. You're
this was for the patrons. Now they're going to unsubscribe.
Too many jokes. Yeah, exactly. Keep making too many jokes about the movies, but
well, no, I have two things now because like I've been thinking about this the whole time we've been talking, because originally I was going to say the Arwen thing, but Jeff, you took that, which is fine.
I'm sorry.
No, it's like, and also I would have liked to have seen, more like elves and dwarves, like them, like send some forces to like the Battle of Pelennor Fields and something. But I think what I'm like you, Pat, it's more like there's stuff I want to know more about rather than things I would have liked to see changed. I want to know more about the nameless things that are at like the center of the earth that Gandalf meets when he goes down with the Balrog. He says like there are tunnels where the earth is gnawed by nameless things, and that Sauron knows them not, for they are older than he. And I'm like, wait a minute. Well, what are these things? And it's like
have they been around?
But I'm not going to talk about them anymore.
Yeah, have they been around as long as Tom Bombadil? Because I want to know more about him too.
too. Yeah, it's like I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like,
well, that's just Tolkien. Yeah, I mean that's just Tolkien like saying, here's something I can make up a villain and I don't have to give him a backstory.
Yeah, he's just giving you, he as the author is just giving you the middle finger. He's just like, I'm just going to put this in here and you're never going to know. You're never going to know. Like, and then like, he went up and died before he could tell us. That's the thing too.
I imagine too that the creature that's in the pool before the Moria gate is one of those kind of Lovecraftian horrors that lives deep in the earth. Because they mentioned that it came from like deep underground or something and made its way into that pool. So I assume they're just like that. They're just mind-bendingly like awful
If only
like
the Lord of the Rings movies had a like horror director that had specialized in horror, before actually directing the Lord of the Rings movies, then they really could have gone into some of that stuff. But
are you making a reference that I'm just not
Peter
getting?
Jackson.
That was
Peter Jackson's rap background.
Yeah. Really?
A lot of horror.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. And that's interesting. But yeah, I've more about the nameless things.
I feel like Golem probably has like a whole catalog in his brain of what these things are because he's met them and seen them.
Oh, probably. I think even in The Hobbit, there's like a reference to that he like goes and talks to like creatures that just live in these corners and caves underground. Yeah,
they should make a video game about Gollum's adventures too.
Just stop it.
They should.
Stop.
They should make a video game about Gollum's adventures. That's good, and then not go under after they make it. So, if you guys remember our Gollum episode in which we talked about the video game, and full disclosure, I have not played the video game.
Yeah,
but
I never played it either.
Everyone who's told me about it has not had anything really good to say, but which is a shame because again, apparently that studio was going to make a Blue Wizards game. And then they went under.
And all your questions could have been answered.
All of our questions could have been
It's so cool walking around as the Hammer of the East, just blowing stuff up.
And then a Tom Bombadil video game. And yeah.
I just imagine Tom Bombadil as a summon character in a video game because that's clearly what he is. He's that summon that you make and he dances around and all the enemies on the screen die.
Yeah, 999.
Like, right, yeah.
Then the Eagles could show up and you could ask them to do something and they just fly away.
There's like a random chance they'll help you. Yeah. It's like you can summon the Eagles, but like whether they help you or not is up to you. You got to roll a
20 or more. Is that
yeah.
It? Yeah.
So before this gets too off the rails, we'd like to take a moment to thank all of you, our patrons who have made this show possible, because your generous donations help us to continue to create The Secrets of Middle-earth and all of our shows here at StarQuest. And of course, you can join us at sqpn.com/give. So now we'd like to hear from you guys. You can leave a comment on this episode on Patreon or on our YouTube channel when we eventually share this episode with the rest of our community of listeners. And as we look forward to recording more Secrets of Middle-earth episodes in 2024, we'd like to ask you guys for your opinion. What topics would you like to hear us discuss? Please send your ideas to our Facebook page or contact us on Twitter, or you can send us an email at middleearth@sqpn.com or leave a comment on our YouTube videos or by visiting our channel at the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. So please join us next time as we continue to explore J.R.R. Tolkien's massive legendarium. Until then, Pat Mason, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
You're very welcome. This was a lot of fun.
And Mike Schramm, thank you as well.
Thanks, Thomas.
And Jeff Haecker, thank you also.
Thanks, Thomas.
And once again, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for joining us on The Secrets of Middle-earth right here on StarQuest.